From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
President Trump's tariffs will take effect immediately after they are announced tomorrow. But the White House keeps the markets guessing on what exactly will be unveiled in the Rose Garden. We'll discuss with former U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai.
And we'll explore the potential impact of the president's threatened 25% tariffs on auto imports with John Bozzella from the Alliance for Automotive Innovation as car dealers report surging sales ahead of April 2nd.
And we'll talk with former Congressman Kevin Brady, the former chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, joining on tariffs and extending the Trump tax cuts ahead of important procedural votes set for this week in the Senate.
Thanks for being with us on this Tuesday evening. It's an extended edition of Balance of Power. We'll be going straight through until 7 p.m. Eastern Time in anticipation of the big event tomorrow, as White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt set the stage for the big Rose Garden announcement.
My understanding is that the tariff announcement will come tomorrow. They will be effective immediately. And the president has been teasing this for quite some time, as you know. He's talked a lot about April 2nd as Liberation Day in America. It would be taking place today if not for April Fool's Day. But tomorrow will be the day, and he's been talking about it for a while.
All right, so let's get to it with Bloomberg's Mario Parker joining us at the table in Washington. Happy April Fool's Day, Mario. Indeed, we would be talking about more details, but the president wanted to wait till the day after. And considering how much he has said about reciprocal tariffs, across-the-board tariffs, sectoral tariffs, we still don't really know what he's going to say around this time tomorrow, do we?
There's so much uncertainty, and we see that playing out in the markets. And in fact, I think one of the more surprising and striking things for those of us who have covered Trump before is the fact that he shrugged off that market impact, even as he's injected so much uncertainty around what exactly he's going to do. The last we heard from Karoline Leavitt this afternoon was that the president was huddling with his team to figure out what the options will be with T-minus 24 hours.
Well, and we know the reports were due today from some of the most senior-most officials who deal with trade, the Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary, and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. Do we have a sense as to whether those reports have made the president rethink what he's planning to announce tomorrow?
I wouldn't pretend to know that part. I mean, they probably inform his decision, of course, but a lot of this for the president is just his instincts. I mean, he spoke about this to us over the summer. He's been saying for a while now the only thing that isn't a surprise is the fact that he's been promising tariffs within his first 100 days in office. I mean, he has studied, he feels as though he's studied history. He's invoked William McKinley, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm getting at is there's not quite a sense that a report will inform his or shape his decision a whole lot, because he feels as though that the United States has been drawing the short end of the stick for a long time based off of the global trade.
All right, Bloomberg's Mario Parker.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We want to get more now with Katherine Tai, former U.S. Trade Representative under the Biden administration, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Ambassador, thank you so much for being here. Obviously, as Mario just outlined, it's basically anyone's guess what it actually is going to be announced tomorrow. What is the best case scenario if it's reciprocal tariffs, and what potentially is the worst?
So let me just take a step back, because this topic of tariffs has been really big in popular parlance since the first Trump administration, and a topic of kitchen table conversation even. But for those of us who've been working in trade policy for 20, 30, 40 years, tariffs are just a part of the tool set when it comes to trade, and actually a really important part. So I just want to start with focusing on what a tariff is and what it isn't. So in the conversation right now, tariffs are either an incredibly awesome, beautiful thing, or it's a real something that is going to have a huge chilling effect on the economy. Which one of those will actually manifest depends on how the tariffs are used and what they're going to look like. And I think the best analogy that I've come up with so far is that a tariff in itself is morally neutral, is actually not that exciting. It's just a tool, just like a 2x4 is a tool. You could take a bunch of 2x4s and you could build something. If you've got an architect's blueprint in hand, you could build a deck, a house, a school, a factory. Or you could take a pile of 2x4s and you could pick them up and you could swing them around your head and you could run down the street and break people's windows with that 2x4 or threaten to beat people up with it, right? It's all in what you are planning to do with that 2x4 and whether or not you have a plan. So when it comes to this great announcement that's coming tomorrow, and by the way, I think we really have to pause and recognize and acknowledge President Trump's incredible showman instincts.
Sure.
We are anticipating, guys, an announcement about tariffs. I mean, in my trade policy experience, that's not very exciting, and yet this administration has managed to make it something really, really exciting. What I would say is this. I also have no idea what's coming tomorrow, and that's kind of stunning, given how much play this topic has had in this president's administration in terms of the focus on it, that even today, 24 hours before, we still don't know. And according to news reports, including from the Wall Street Journal this morning, it sounds like the administration itself also hasn't decided what the tariffs are going to look like. So I think it's important to start with a couple questions as we're anticipating tomorrow, and take it from an old trade policy hand. First, what I would want to do when I see the announcement, right, is just bring the heart rate down, take a look at what's on paper and what they're saying. First, what's the legal authority that they are invoking? And is there a legal authority they're invoking? That's really important because increasingly we are seeing from this administration a willingness to buck the rule of law. If there is a legal invocation in what's announced tomorrow, then let's take a look. What is the invocation? If it's about international economic emergency powers, that probably does create a basis for a pretty immediate application of those tariffs. If it might be some other legal framework, it could take some time to establish the basis for applying those tariffs. Second, look at the scope of the tariffs. What's the product scope? Is it on everything under the sun, or is it focused on sectors and specific industries? Next, the scope of countries that it's on. Is it on everybody who trades with the United States, or is there a focus in terms of where the tariffs are directed? Third, what level are the tariffs? Now, are they nice round numbers like 10, 25, 50? Yeah. Are they 17, 19? What that's going to tell you is whether or not any economic analysis has gone into the design of those tariffs. Okay. And then finally, I think the main point is there an architect's blueprint that is guiding what's coming tomorrow? What is the purpose and what is the plan? Is there a house that we're trying to build? Is it a factory that we're trying to build? Or is it all just a giant performance of drama?
Well, we've been asking these questions every day for weeks. Just like you, no answers. But let's stick with the metaphor for a moment here. If you hit somebody with a 2x4, a pretty blunt instrument, they're probably going to hit you back. And we're expecting that also to come after these announcements tomorrow. Case in point, the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, reaffirming his plan for retaliation. Let's listen.
As I also mentioned to the President and was very clear, we will respond to additional measures. So we will put in place retaliatory measures if there are additional measures put against Canada tomorrow.
There's not only the response from our trading partners like this, but you saw the first economic dialogue between China, Japan, and South Korea last weekend. What does this all lead to from a geopolitical standpoint, even more than a trade standpoint?
I think even from a geopolitical standpoint, what you need to be looking for is what is the stated purpose or what is the inferred purpose of these tariffs? Quite often what you hear from the Trump administration is that everything is in service of negotiating an amazing deal. So a couple questions there. A deal also is just a tool in furtherance of some larger objective. So what are the purposes of these deals that may be negotiated? if you can get agreement around an objective, quite often in international economic cooperation, in geopolitics, when you negotiate an agreement, it's usually because there's some fundamental purpose that the parties have agreed they're going to try to accomplish together. So when you start laying down these tariffs and you start having retaliatory tariffs placed on you, it really calls into question, what is it you're trying to accomplish? And if you don't have a meeting of the minds, what's going to be the purpose of any deal that you strike with another partner who doesn't agree with you in the first place?
Well, one of the things the president has suggested he wants to accomplish is bringing down trade deficits with other countries. Is it realistic to even imagine a scenario in which the U.S. didn't have deficits with some of these very large partners, or there were no barriers, tariffs or otherwise?
So, you know, I think that this really brings to light one of the most important and challenging trade relationships that the United States has, and that's with the People's Republic of China. There you do have an enormous deficit from the side of the United States and an enormous surplus from the Chinese side. What you also see is that the United States overall runs a goods deficit in its overall trade balance, whereas China runs a significant trade surplus. So we have these the two largest economies in the world, who are playing two very, very different roles in the world economy. One is the world's manufacturer. The other one is the world's consumer. And you can see how those extreme types of roles that you're playing can lead to imbalances and friction and geopolitical tension. One challenge that I see here, and one question that I would pose for the first 2 months and a couple odd weeks in the Trump administration, is the degree to which the U.S.-China trade issue has really taken a back seat to this show about tariffs and reciprocity and the application of tariffs on countries like Canada, the countries of the European Union, and Mexico, all trading partners that the United States is going to need to find ways to align with if we're going to take on the common challenge of this outsized production force that is the Chinese economy.
It's great to have you with us on this day before. Katherine Tai, former U.S. trade representative in the Biden administration, we thank you for the insights. Coming up, the S&P 500 closing higher on the day. We'll get the latest on how markets are anticipating tomorrow's tariff announcement after a lot of volatility. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The president has always said that the stock market is a snapshot of a moment in time, and he's doing what's best for Main Street, and Wall Street will work out just fine in this administration, just like they did in their first term.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt discussing Wall Street's reaction to tomorrow's tariff announcement. For the latest on the markets, we turn now to Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick in New York. Romaine, it's always a pleasure to have you here on the program, and we're staying up late the next couple of nights here to see what is coming on tariffs. We've been around the world and back, I feel like, on Wall Street. What is the sentiment in the markets ahead of the actual news tomorrow?
Well, there's kind of two things developing. You're seeing a big sell-off in certain sectors of the market that are most exposed to tariffs. So that includes automotive companies, both those that make cars and those that make parts. You're also seeing it in the apparel and retail space, two industries that rely heavily on imports from outside the United States. On the other hand, Joe, what you're not seeing is a whole lot of broad market panic. You had a market that actually staged a minor rally today, actually finished higher in the green. And a lot of that was because some folks don't think that this will be systemic, that the pain won't be necessarily broad based. So you're not really seeing a lot of activity in the options markets, a lot of activity in hedging to the downside based on what happens tomorrow. But there's a big asterisk there, Joe. And the idea is that it's going to take time to really see the economic effect of this. It could even be weeks. And I think that's when you'll start to see more of a market reaction. Remember, we're getting estimates from economists all over the place saying that these tariffs could boost average household costs by $2,000. I've seen estimates in the $6,000 to $10,000 range, but a lot of it ultimately is going to be dependent on what your household buys on a normal basis and whether you're still willing to buy that once those tariffs kick in.
Well, Well, Romaine, as we consider the president's messaging around this, he argues that these tariffs are actually designed to protect American businesses, to make their businesses better. Are we seeing any indication of there being positive recipients to his tariff messaging in the markets right now?
Well, probably the only real positive are going to be in the metal space, particularly with aluminum and steel companies that would certainly benefit from those increased tariffs and more blocking of imports. The problem, though, Kayleigh, too, is there is sort of the short-term, long-term. And I know the Trump administration has talked about the short-term pain for long-term structural gains. The problem that you're hearing from all of these companies out there is they can't really pivot that fast. You just can't set up a new factory to make auto parts overnight. That's something that takes years and billions of dollars. I was speaking on my program a little bit earlier with a building products company. They talked about the same thing. If we block softwood lumber coming in from Canada, there's no real easy way to source that. A, we don't grow a lot of the trees that we need for that. And B, even if we did, sawmills are operating at 100% capacity. Similar story when it comes to retail and other areas, Kayleigh. The solution to what could be unleashed tomorrow at 4 p.m. in Washington is not a short-term solution. It's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of money, and most of the companies we talk to say they have neither.
All right, Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, thank you for covering it for us this evening. And, of course, Romaine will be on the air when this Rose Garden announcement begins tomorrow, right after the close at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. But still ahead here on Balance of Power, we'll look at one of those sectors that Romaine just mentioned, automakers, and how they're preparing for the implementation of tariffs tomorrow. With John Bozzella, President and CEO of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. He's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're spending a lot of time interpreting and understanding what the tariff implications are for us, of course, here in the United States, but I think importantly recognizing that, in particular, Europe may respond. And so how ultimately the tariff structure sets out and lays out is going to have a big impact on some of the decisions we make over the next year.
Rivian CEO RJ Scaringe speaking on Bloomberg TV earlier today, ahead of President Trump's planned imposition of 25% tariffs on auto imports, effective tomorrow. And joining us now for more on the impact on the sector is John Bozzella, President and CEO of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, live in studio with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. John, welcome back to Balance of Power. It's not just the 25% tariffs on auto imports. It's also the expiration of the exemption U.S. automakers had on Mexico and Canada tariffs, reciprocal tariffs. There's steel and aluminum tariffs in place here as well, not to mention whatever else could be coming down the line. How dangerous of a cocktail is it for the auto sector?
Yeah, this is going to be a significant challenge, I think, for the auto sector. There's no question about that. What we learned last week, when the president announced the auto tariffs last Wednesday, what he talked about was 25% tariffs on imported vehicles and on parts, and that those tariffs applied to Mexico and Canada and other trading partners. So there is no question that prices will go up. There's no question in my mind that volumes will come down. In other words, sales will eventually come down as a result of this. So I think there will be a significant impact as the companies work through how to manage.
Mm-hmm. In the meantime, it's a party on car dealer lots, from what we understand. General Motors deliveries up 17% first quarter, 15% gain in retail volume. Ford saw retail sales rise, Toyota as well. How long can this last?
Yeah, as long as non-tariffed inventories last. It's as simple as that.
Is that months?
Right now, it's probably a couple months at the most, right? I mean, we are at a traditionally decent level of inventory landed on dealer lots across the country, maybe 60 days, 55, 60 days. That's not as much inventory as we've seen in the past. It's certainly better than what we saw in the pandemic, but that's going to run out. That's again, 2 months. And then what you're going to see after that, of course, is prices. Because the bottom line is this. We're talking about massive assets, huge plants, long supply chains, machinery and equipment that can't move overnight.
Yeah.
And so as companies work through how to comply and they learn what the impact of these tariffs are, it's just going to take time.
Well, and to that point, if all of this is about investing in American manufacturing, those investments don't just take a long time. They're costly. And if
Yes.
you're having profits crimped already by higher input costs, how are these companies going to be able to afford to build those factories, to hire those additional workers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, look, we share the president's point of view that we want a thriving auto sector in the United States. There's no question about that. We're committed to the United States. All companies that are manufacturing here, not just the U.S. domiciled companies, but internationally companies who've put down roots here. We want to continue to build here. We want to continue to grow here. How that happens, under what rules that happens, how quickly it can happen are all questions of capital allocation. And it's really, really important. This is a high asset, low margin business. Mm-hmm. And 25% tariffs are massive in that context. You see a headline like we saw from Mercedes today, considering withdrawing its least expensive vehicles from the U.S. market, including the GLA SUV. Are we going to see more instances where it's why even bother trying to survive the tariffs? Just don't sell in America. Maybe. It's a little too early for me to make those types of predictions. And I think, look, companies are going to have to figure out what the best go-to-market strategy is and what the best way to address the tariff risk is. But one of the things we haven't talked about so far, it's not only inbound, right? So what do I do about a small volume import vehicle that might not make as much sense in this market? I think companies that export from the United States are also likely going to face retaliation. And so that's a challenge. And a thriving, competitive, healthy auto industry is an industry that creates consumer choice and flexibility and affordability through imports, but also grows through exports. And so both are challenged in the near term with this type of policy. And so it's going to take some time for the industry to adjust.
We just have about a minute left here. The president to this point has not been very forthcoming about exemptions or what it would take to actually earn one of those. Are you optimistic there could be some carve-outs, whether it's low-cost parts, which we understand automakers are pushing for, or otherwise?
Yeah. So, look, I'm an optimist by nature. So I don't want to suggest that I know what's about to happen. I would hope that there would be an opportunity for further discussions about exemptions, about opportunities to work out through trade discussions how we can get this right so that companies have the time and the certainty to be able to comply. Does this help anyone, the Teslas, Rivians, 100% assembled in the U.S., or is it impossible to find a vehicle that's not completely made with American parts? It's impossible to find a vehicle that's made completely in America with American parts. Yeah. Now, some companies are a little bit better equipped and have maybe a lower level of non-U.S. components to their U.S.-built vehicles, and some maybe more. Yep. But everybody's going to get hurt. That's quite a line. John Bozzella, thank you, President and CEO of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation on Bloomberg. Coming up, a lot more ahead as we look at the tax implications of tomorrow's tariffs announcement. Former Congressman Kevin Brady will be with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The tariff is a tax increase. It's a tax that applies to imported goods in the United States, so it burdens U.S. importers. There's no way that it's a tax cut. It increases revenue. It increases the tax burden in the U.S. economy.
Erica York of the Tax Foundation on the early edition of Balance of Power yesterday, talking about how tariffs might impact impending tax policy, because we're doing it all at once right now in Washington. Joining us is Kevin Brady, former U.S. Congressman from Texas, spokesman for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation, of course, former chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. It's great to see you in town.
Thank you, Jeff.
I don't know if you're hearing anything on what we're going to learn tomorrow, but everybody's trying to get a sense of what this announcement will be from President Trump. Whatever it is, will help to color the debate around taxes, right? We started this whole process talking about tariffs helping to raise revenue to cover the cost of tax cuts. Will that be fulfilled tomorrow?
Likely not necessarily. I think people are hoping that, tariffs will be short and used as leverage to bring countries to the table with better resolution on issues, including lower tariffs. I think people are hopeful it's not a high universal tariff that is permanent in nature, which will cause a lot of economic damage. But I think the point is, for all the uncertainty that's around tariffs, seems to be in every sector and lots of families around the country, it really drives home the need for certainty within the tax code. And I think really the pace that the House and Senate are moving forward on recognizes the sooner they get this done, the better. They still got some big hurdles. This is a hard job. In the best of times, with a near zero majority in the House, higher degree of difficulty in a bigger way, and debts and deficits matter. So there's a lot of challenges ahead. But I think I really commend the House Senate tax writers. They are moving as fast as it's allowed.
But are they moving in the same direction, rowing in the same boat to an extent that will allow this process to move quickly?
Ultimately, they will. I'm confident they will. But the House and Senate, they are different personalities, and they move different ways and different rules. So I think the Senate this week looks to be sort of advancing their idea. I think some of us thought that the next step would be the two houses have reconciled sort of the design. What I always said was reconciliation was the runway you landed tax reform on. So there are definitely two different architects, different designs at this point. Ultimately, I think, important for the Senate to act in advance like the House has. But the sooner they in the White House get on the same page, the better.
You're in an interesting moment here as you've been spending time in Washington now for months, getting closer to the finish line to extend or make permanent the Trump tax cuts. That's been your charge. We're bogged down with conversation about tariffs right now, and some would suggest it's the opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. You heard Erica York's comment when we were coming into this conversation. Taxpayers for Common Sense President Steve Ellis said this in a statement. In the real economic world, a tariff is a tax. If you raise $600 billion a year in revenue, you're taking that amount away from individuals and businesses in the private economy. By any definition, this is a tax increase. So we could be in a world where they cancel each other out?
So I hope not. I actually think tariffs are a tax, but worse economically, because not only do they drive up prices and really distort the economy and slow it down in most cases, it invites retaliation on our made in America workers. You know what I mean, in a big way. And as you know, it's not enough to buy American. You need to sell American. All throughout the world, tens of millions of jobs depend upon our ability to do that successfully. The tax code plays a key role in that, but tariffs really change the whole dynamics there. I think that's why people are hopeful and why policymakers, I think, in Congress are giving the president a bit of a honeymoon here, you know what I mean, to unveil this strategy, which we're going to see a lot of it tomorrow. But they're very nervous about the impact on prices, the economy, and their workers, especially because our trade agreement with Canada and Mexico is the most consequential trade agreement on the planet. Has worked beautifully, was renegotiated under President Trump, and not only does it create about 17 million jobs in the U.S., they give us more affordable prices, more affordable cars, and allows us to combine our strengths to compete better against China. So, lots at stake in all these announcements.
Well, and clearly, sir, you are a big advocate for the USMCA. When you hear the language now coming out of Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney about this having fundamentally altered the relationship between Canada and the U.S., do you think that's just posturing because he has to put up a show of force against these policies, or is this actually going to be hard to come back from?
It's going to be difficult to come back. This is such a strong partnership economically, and integration has worked for all of our strengths. It's tough to hear about, being named the 51st state or sort of the rhetoric around this. It's having an impact in both of our borders as well. So I think the sooner that we can come to the table and work through these issues, certainly Mexico and Canada agreement with America is almost near zero tariffs on most products, pretty low barriers, not perfect. We've had trade tensions. We have to resolve those, but we should never forget, because of our strengths, putting them together, we compete better against China. We compete better against the world. That that matters a lot to jobs and prosperity.
You mentioned the thin Republican majority in the House right now. I suspect it's one you couldn't have imagined while you were there. There were a couple of special elections in Florida today, House races, where it appears that Republicans will hold 2 seats, one formerly held by Matt Gaetz, the other Mike Waltz, the president's national security advisor. But that's 6th district race, the Waltz seat. The district Donald Trump won by more than 30 points. You've got a Republican said to be on the ropes here and might scrape out a close victory. This is being framed by some as a proxy, as a statement on Trump policies. Do you see it that way, or are we reading into this too much?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. I don't know that race quite that well. I've been following it closely like everyone else has. So I just think these special elections get a lot of attention, and then when they don't really, come out, they're quickly forgotten. You know what I mean? Like,
that's right.
They tend to work back to the norm. I think that'll happen again. But sure, I think Republicans and Democrats are paying attention to every election at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there won't be a third special election for Elise Stefanik's seat because the president was a little bit concerned about holding on to that one. Therefore, he's keeping her in the House rather than UN ambassador. But an issue in her district in New York, really all of New York, and other high-tax states that we often talk about with you is the SALT cap. And Bloomberg is reporting today that they're looking at, Republicans in Congress are looking at raising it to $25,000 from the current $10,000. I wonder if that's in line with what you're hearing, and if you think that is enough to pacify the SALT caucus while still keeping conservative hardliners in line.
Well, it should be, because it's a huge increase. I mean, both dollar-wise and the impact on the tax bill itself is going to be significant. It is certainly a huge expansion of what is basically one of the biggest subsidies we've got in the tax code, on the individual side of that. And so I would think for the high-tax states, again, whose most of taxpayers overwhelmingly got a tax cut, that is a huge number. I think probably bigger than I thought it would be, frankly. But I think it's going to be very careful, very important for them to arrive at that consensus number between Republicans, the House, Senate, and the White House. The sooner they do that, the better they're able to move the whole package forward.
There are a few stories that we could ask you about that tend to get more attention from our viewers and listeners, our subscribers at Bloomberg. The SALT story gets a read spike every time it hits the terminal here. Does that number sound like something that will bring members of the SALT caucus over? Because you can explain they're needed to pass any final bill, right?
So I think given that there are a number of Republicans who believe the SALT tax number should be zero, that everyone should just pay their own state and local taxes, that would be a big give to, I think, the Republican members from the high-tax states. So, if that is the number, that would be a huge win for them. I don't know if that's the case. You hear about it doubling to 20,000. And I guess one question is that 25,000 for all incomes or for some? There's lots of ways to sort of target those things because so much of the SALT goes to the $1 million households. So, still more details, I think, need to be known.
And the details do matter.
They do.
Kevin Brady, former chair of the House Ways and Means Committee and spokesperson for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. And as we alluded to, it's Election Day in those 2 districts in Florida, but also in Wisconsin, with a hotly contested state Supreme Court seat up for grabs. We'll have more with our political panel on those races next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Wisconsin is the fulcrum state. It's the ultimate swing state. It's often the state that puts a presidential candidate over the 270 votes needed to win election. That's why we pay so much attention to Wisconsin. And because Wisconsin is so competitive and close, it tends to reflect the moment in politics. Has the moment become more Republican? Has the moment become more Democratic? Or is it about the same as it was last November?
Larry Sabato, director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia, speaking about today's state Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. That vote Plus, 2 special House elections in Florida are acting as the first major electoral test for Republicans since President Trump retook office. And joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is this evening's political panel. Jim Kessler, Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Welcome to you both. I don't know if we want to pick a single barometer race here, Jim, but as the Democrat is doing fairly well in Florida's 6th district, at least comparatively. If you're judging it by the November margins Republicans were able to put up, Randy Fine is not polling that way on this election day. Do you have even a glimmer of hope this is actually a seat that flips, or are we overplaying this?
There's a glimmer, but I mean, it would be an absolute shocker if a Democrat won that seat. Look, I think a Democrat is going to perform well enough in that seat that Republicans, particularly in the House, will be scared. Look, there's a fear meter if you're a Republican legislator. There's Donald Trump and getting on his bad side, and it's voters and getting on their bad side. The fear meter is about to move in this direction towards voters starting tonight.
Well, the Republican, to your point, is expected to win. Randy Fine hasn't raised as much money as his Democratic rival. We've heard a lot of criticism of the candidate, but in a district that Donald Trump won by over 30 points, what's the message to Republicans? Because, you know, Democrats are already talking moral victories here.
Well, I think, here's my bold prediction. I think that if we lose 6 in Florida, then Mr. Waltz is also going to get his walking papers from the White House after all the signal gate and everything. So let's see what happens, because you know he used to hold that seat.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. I think there's a lot on the line here tonight.
Because voters are connecting the dots
I
to the signal?
don't know that voters are connecting the dots, but I certainly think that the Republican majority will lose all of their patience for someone like that, who not only took the position in the White House, but then also caused them to lose a seat in the House. So it's going to be interesting to watch, I think.
Yeah, well, and I wonder how Elise Stefanik would react to that as she remains in her seat, having not vacated for another special election. I do wonder about Wisconsin, too, Lisa, because that is being framed as not necessarily just a referendum on President Trump and his policies, but a referendum on Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, with Musk being very financially active in that race, which is $90 million spent on a state Supreme Court race.
Setting records like beyond anything we've ever seen. And I'm also under the impression that it's because Elon Musk and Tesla have a big stateside fight that's happening there about whether or not to have Teslas in the marketplace there, right? Or maybe have dealerships there in the marketplace. So I know that he has a real business interest in seeing that go his way. But I do think that there is a general dissatisfaction with the voters there. They, I think, will be happy to take his $100 for signing a petition and then make maybe a different choice when they go to the ballot box.
The most expensive judicial battle in U.S. history. How did we get to this point?
America loves this, don't they?
Is this all Elon?
I mean, it's part of it. Look, this is the way our system has gotten. Really, since Citizens United in 2006, the amount of money in the system is insane. It's built up Washington, D.C., downtown, and suburbs amazingly. I think voters hate this. I feel bad for the poor people of Wisconsin. I do think that the Democrat is going to win this race here. I do think it will send some shockwaves through the Republican Party. And it is a warning sign that Elon Musk is toxic.
Well, so does he become the fall guy if this doesn't go the way Republicans would like it to?
Well, I just want to build on what Lisa just said about the Florida 6 race, which is Donald Trump wants to find a scapegoat that is not him, okay? So Mike Waltz could be one of them. Elon Musk could be one of them. It could be both of them.
A lot to follow up on there. I have to ask you more about Mike Waltz, because you just made a pretty bold prediction. Is there more coming? He supposedly had other chats on his phone about not necessarily classified information, but in the Signal chat, also reportedly using Gmail to communicate about important topics.
Yeah, it's not a good look to be in the position that he's in.
So what's coming?
I mean, it just feels like it is a constant, you know, I'm a Washington cynic. I've been here a long time. It feels like there are a lot of knives out for Mike Waltz. It feels like he's the guy who has to go. There's no way that they'd ask someone who's Senate confirmed to step out. So I think the DOD is probably safe with Pete Hegseth for another couple of weeks. We'll see. But I think Mike Waltz is the guy who is definitely in pretty pretty dire straits over there at the White House, which is why I made the joke that if tonight doesn't go well, this could be the end of him. But that Gmail story about him in the Washington Post today, using that for his business and interactions with government, secure conversations, is also very, very concerning.
But with the number of times President Trump spoke in his defense last week, the suggestion that, yes, he made a mistake, that he was the one at fault, but he is a good man and President Trump stands by him as national security advisor. Do you really believe the president would change that tune so soon?
One mistake is excusable. Two, a little bit less so. Lisa's right. Like, this was leaked by somebody in the Trump White House going after him. I have to say, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Mike Waltz, I never would have guessed that Mike Waltz would be the one that's in the most trouble in the national security environment in the Trump administration.
Around this time tomorrow, we're going to be talking about a tariff announcement from Donald Trump. The subject will go back, of course, to this. We've been obsessing over this for days here. How should Democrats be answering this? There was a resolution that Senator Tim Kaine was going to bring forth on this, but it sounds like there's not a lot the party can do, or Congress for that matter. This is truly the power of the executive.
That is true. The president has enormous power when it comes to tariffs. But look, we just came out with focus groups of Trump voters asking about tariffs, and even among Trump voters, they're very concerned about this. So they're also very concerned about the economy, and they're not sure Trump is handling the economy well. So Democrats have to separate the signal from the noise, as it is, and really focus on the economy, on the things that people care about. I wish people cared about democracy. They don't really care about democracy or deportations of Venezuelans to Salvador. They care about the economy. They care about these tariffs. Stick to that.
Well, when we talk about Democrats countering, one has been doing so for going on 23 hours now at this point, Lisa. Senator Cory Booker is still on the floor. He has been speaking for that long. We're about to cross over 23. It's been since 7 p.m. last night. He could very well set the filibuster record here. And his speech is really just about countering Trump policies. Is this the best example we have seen so far of Democrats actually trying to do something visible to stand up to this administration?
I still don't think it gets outside the Beltway. I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, good for him. He's doing what he thinks and knows that he has the power to do as a U.S. senator. My proud guy from New Jersey, happy to see him up there doing some smart things. But I'm not sure that anybody else is really paying attention. I mean, I'm not sure even all of our friends in Washington are paying attention right now. Unfortunately, I think that Jim's point is really right. It's that we have to continue as a party, as a Republican Party. Democrats also have to speak up and speak out about the issues that they care about. I think if they felt secure in their own economic situation, they might care about democracy and they might care about deportations. But until they're secure in their own actual home with their own actual budget, they will not care about those things because they want that level of security at home.
Wow. I don't think I could string two sentences together after 23 hours. I don't know about the rest of you guys.
Stand upright.
Does this matter anymore to go to this kind of trouble? Strom Thurmond would have been on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow. We're in a different world now.
That's true. And I think it does get noticed here. It'll certainly be noticed by grassroots Democratic donors. And there's a feeling among a lot of Democrats, which is you don't have to win, but you have to fight. And they're seeing that with Cory Booker. And look, maybe this doesn't show up on mainstream media, but it's going to show up on social media. And my hat's off to Cory Booker, who's up there for 23 hours. It shows you can be a vegan and stand 23 hours and speak.
He's getting that energy from somewhere. I don't know where. I don't know if it's a lot of caffeine. And I should point out, not technically a filibuster, just a very, very long.
Though he is
filibustering,
I think we can say.
Yes, I think that would be the verb. That's what's going on the Senate floor. I also quickly, Lisa, in our final minute here, want to talk about what happened on the House floor today. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna's resolution to allow new parents to proxy vote would have been a privileged resolution. Speaker Johnson wanted to find a way around it, and 8 Republicans sided with her to shoot down that get-around rule. What does that tell you?
I watched the floor. I watched it happen today. I watched it on. I mean, to me, it just feels like the Democrats had a lot of really good points. They pointed out a lot of Republicans that have done proxy voting, that have used it in previous circumstances for real reasons. I watched another Democratic member stand there with her 6-week-old baby, and it really spoke to me. I think that it just is not a good look for the Republican Party to be not in favor of families. It really is counter to what we stand for.
What's the Republican allergy to proxy voting in general? Is this like a back in the office
I think it is.
Thing,
yep. I think it's a back in the office thing. That's exactly what it is, showing that we're here, that we're using the tax dollars properly. I think it falls on deaf ears. And in fact, if anything, I was really happy to see Congresswoman Luna speak up and speak out about it.
Great conversation. Lisa Camuso-Miller and Jim Kessler, we thank you so much for the insights. Next hour, we'll reassemble our political panel as part of this extended edition of Balance of Power. Coming up, we'll look ahead to the next hour on this extended edition as we count down to tomorrow's big Rose Garden tariff event. We'll be right back with more on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Kaylee Lyons. I'm Joe Matthew. We're live in Washington where we're just getting started here. Coming up in the next hour of this extended edition of Balance of Power, we'll spend time with Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina. Republican members of Congress, Kaylee, asking just like we are, what will we learn tomorrow?
Yeah, we'll get the take from the other side of the aisle, too. Not in Congress, but actually a state executive. The
right.
Democratic governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, will also be with us to talk about the potential impact tariffs will have on his state. And we have to talk about how it's going to impact financial markets as well, although arguably it already has. Even if today was an update, those have been few and far between in recent weeks.
That's for sure. And, you know, look, a lot of this, as we've been hearing over the course of the show today, and we'll likely hear again next hour, is that tomorrow really may not be the clarifying event that many are hoping for. This could reset the clock on some tariffs. It could raise whole new questions. And it's unclear exactly how the president is going to roll this out. Will we instantly know exactly what he's talking about? We might not see the actual paperwork until he's done speaking.
Yeah, all we know is the when, and it's after the close of regular hours trading tomorrow. But we'll be back with more Balance of Power this evening as futures are about to open here on the East Coast. We'll have more straight ahead on Bloomberg TV and radio.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, thanks for being with us on a special extended edition of Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
The White House says reciprocal tariffs are set to take effect immediately after President Trump announces them less than 24 hours from now. A rollout plan for after the market closed Wednesday from the Rose Garden.
We'll look ahead to the potential scope of the tariffs and their impact this hour with voices from both sides of the aisle. Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina, Democratic Governor Jared Polis of Colorado.
Plus, we'll have analysis on what the measures will mean for investors' portfolios. Cindy Beaulieu, CIO of North America at Conning, will join us with U.S. futures now open for trading. Of course, futures beginning to trade, and we're essentially flat right now on S&P E-mini futures, NASDAQ 100 futures, and Dow futures for that matter, after we saw some mixed action today, but we did end in positive territory on the NASDAQ 100 and S&P 500 in the Tuesday session. Right now, it seems like no one's really looking to take any kind of strong position before we know what we're going to know tomorrow.
Yeah, far from a sell-off today, kind of like the market's holding its breath, and we won't know until after tomorrow's closing bell. Kaylee, a Rose Garden announcement set for 4 p.m. When it comes to the tariffs, President Trump will be holding forth. It gives us an entire other trading day to wait for news.
Yeah, and of course, it's not just U.S. investors who are looking for news, but investors all over the world, because we don't exactly know what these tariffs will look like, who will be targeted, and what kind of levies they will be facing. And that certainly goes for the Asia Pacific. And joining us now live from Hong Kong is Bloomberg's Stephen Engle. So, Steve, what kind of action are we seeing in Asia ahead of this announcement?
Well, I can talk specifically right now on how China is reacting. And right now we know that President Xi Jinping has essentially instructed his bureaucrats to remain calm through this period, wait to hear what those reciprocal tariffs will do to China tariffs, which, of course, the Trump administration version 2.0 has added 20% because of the fentanyl issue. So they're bracing for the worst and the better outcomes. The problem is there hasn't been a lot of high-level negotiations or even discussions between the two sides. A lot of people that I spoke to after I spent the last 20 of the last 30 days on the mainland, including at the China Development Forum in Beijing last weekend, and then the Boao Forum in Hainan Island just this past week. Essentially, they're saying that there needs to be high-level meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. Donald Trump obviously has been preoccupied with Mexico and Canada and the European Union and Ukraine, perhaps not addressing specifically the China issue. But right now, China is prepared and will resolutely, according to Wang Yi, the foreign minister, in an interview with the Russian media, they will respond resolutely against any added tariffs. And that he also said those tariffs that are already in place are unjustified. So Beijing is preparing for the worst right now and trying to shore up its own domestic economy.
Bloomberg's Stephen Engle. We thank you, Stephen, for the insights. Joining us now from Toronto for the next leg in this story, Bloomberg's Decloet. Derek, thank you so much for joining us. What will be the response from Canada?
I mean, if there will be retaliation, Prime Minister Mark Carney made that clear today. I'd say the mood right now in the country, and from what we can tell in the government, is both anxiety and a little bit of curiosity, because there has not been a lot of information flow from the White House to his trading partners about how this is going to work. So Trump has said a lot of different things about Canada in his second term so far. How high will these tariffs be, and what will the carve-outs be? Will they go after Canadian oil, for example? Canada's got a lot more at stake here than almost every other country, because 3/4 of Canadian exports go to the U.S. So. But there will definitely be a response from the Canadian government, and probably pretty quickly after tomorrow.
Well, should we expect that response to be from Canada as a whole, Derek, or could we see it kind of province by province, as we have already seen in the case of what Ontario tried to do initially with electricity exports and then walked back?
Yeah, I think you'll see both. I mean, the counter tariffs, they lie within the responsibility of the national government, and we're watching for some potentially big items here. One thing that Canada has not done yet is put tariffs on U.S. cars. That's a big chunk of the Canadian auto market. Canada's by far the biggest buyer of U.S.-made vehicles. So will there be a retaliatory tariff on those? That's a big item potentially for Ford and General Motors and some other companies. But we're likely to see some provincial reaction to, you mentioned electricity in the case of Ontario. British Columbia has talked about a few measures as well.
All right, Bloomberg's Derek Decloet, thank you so much for joining us. And now, while Mark Carney has talked about a pretty aggressive game here, the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, has been playing things a bit more cool. And we want to get more on that with Bloomberg's Mexico bureau chief, Carolina Millan, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio this week. So, Carolina, Sheinbaum obviously has gotten a lot of praise for the way with which she has conducted and navigated this so far with President Trump. Does that change tomorrow? Is she going to have to be forced to retaliate?
This is a really interesting question, because she has been emphasizing since the beginning of the year the cool-headed approach, not announcing any forceful measures until knowing the fine print of the Trump measures. Leading up to the April 2nd date, she has been discussing the fact that Mexico doesn't have tariffs with the U.S. And so if this idea of the retaliatory tariffs is true, then there shouldn't be tariffs added on Mexico. So that seems to be the big gamble. At this point, though, what we know, of course, is that President Trump will be speaking in the afternoon. And recall that President Sheinbaum is very deliberate about when she makes her statements. We're not really expecting any news from her until the following Thursday morning, when she holds her daily press conference at 7:30 a.m. in Mexico.
We've got the expiration coming up at the end of this week. We've got the potential for adding more levies tomorrow. Presumably, you've got aluminum and steel. Where is the fluidity in this negotiation? Any of these could change, I suspect, as President Trump negotiates, presumably this week, with Claudia Sheinbaum.
Yes, absolutely. And we know these are key sectors. The auto sector, as Derek was mentioning, is big on both sides of the border. But what President Sheinbaum is doing is emphasizing all the work that's been done on the border, on migration, and looking to use this as leverage to evade these tariffs.
We've got a lot to learn still. Bloomberg's Mexico bureau chief, Carolina Millan, we thank you so much for being with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, how lawmakers are bracing for tomorrow's tariff announcement. They know a little more than we do at the moment. We'll speak with Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I believe in free trade, and reciprocity puts a downward ratchet on any tariffs that are imposed by the administration, because if another country doesn't like it, they have a path in front of them, which is to lower the tariffs they have on American goods, which in turn will lower the tariffs we have on theirs.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas around this time last evening on Balance of Power, talking to us about why he supports President Trump's plan for reciprocal tariffs, what they may lead to. Joining us now, his colleague in the House, Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina. Congressman, it's good to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Is that the end game here? We're doing well, although we're kind of in the dark on what we're going to learn tomorrow. And I wonder if we have this announcement of reciprocal tariffs, maybe even across the board tariffs tomorrow, and by Friday they start to fall down based on the reaction from some of our trading partners. Is that the best case scenario?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball as to what the president's going to announce tomorrow. You know, I think the whole thing, and I don't know we're doing a great job of educating the public, is the terrible trade practices that other countries have had against American goods. And I think the president is just trying to level the playing field. You know, I got asked a question a little while ago, what about the revenue generated from tariffs? I hope we don't generate one penny, because I'd like everybody to level the playing field. You know, Senator Cruz said, free trade. I don't know how well we do that with countries like communist China, because they're heavily subsidized industries. But we want to make it as clear as possible that we can put American goods in other countries just as they put their goods in ours. And doing a free and a reciprocal trade kind of economies between countries really is what the president is trying to obtain.
Well, so, Congressman, on your point about revenue not being the appropriate objective here, perhaps, when you hear the White House trade advisor, Peter Navarro, suggesting things like tariffs raising $6 trillion over 10 years, $600 billion a year, you don't put any credence behind those numbers.
Well, not that it couldn't. It very well could. But again, that should not be our end goal with this. It should not be generating revenue. It should be rather opening up trade, opening up markets for American goods and services. That's what the end game is. It should not be about raising money. It should be about actually putting our goods in other countries that heretofore really have been preventing us from doing so.
What are you hearing from your constituents, Congressman? You know the flurry that some of the town hall meetings started in the media, but you're not only isolated to town hall meetings. Part of your job, even when you're in Washington, is dealing with constituent services, taking phone calls. What's the biggest worry, particularly when you hear from farmers in your state?
Yeah, I think it's the uncertainty, to be very honest and very objective, is what's going to happen, when's it going to happen, how bad, if any, are the downward effects going to be. And, you know, I'm on the trade subcommittee on Ways and Means, and we've been talking about this. You know, how do we react to this? Is this the right thing? And if so, how much? A lot of this is in the president's hands. And, you know, it's up to us to either like it or defend it. Or not defend it. I personally think it's a good idea. Really where it matters is what the details, what comes out tomorrow.
Well, you say it's in the president's hands, but Congressman, given your role in the House of Representatives, isn't this part of your Article 1 duties as well? Should you and your colleagues not have a say here?
Yeah, and actually, Kayla, it is constitutionally part of our duties, and we should have a say in this. That said, you know, the last administration for the last 4 years did absolutely nothing on trade, absolutely nothing. And so we're in a very, very difficult situation. Whatever the president puts in, we have to either agree with or disagree with. But he has the ability and the power to put some of these things into action immediately. It takes a much more measured approach and a much more, defined approach to really do it as far as Congress goes. But, you know, the president sees the action and sees this as doing now. Good Lord, the first 100 days have been like a hurricane as far as his action. And he just wants fair trade, and he wants free trade, rather, and he wants things squared away as quick as possible.
It's not the only story that's cooking right now in Washington. Maybe closer to home for you, Congressman, is the tax debate, the tax and spend debate that's happening on Capitol Hill that will lead to a reconciliation package that Republicans are working on here. And, of course, that includes extending or making permanent the Trump tax cuts. There's a big argument right now about how much to cut and how much it would cost to make permanent the Trump tax cuts. The Senate has some very important votes to get the ball rolling procedurally this week. As a member of the House Republican Conference, are you worried that the Senate is going to take control of numbers that your caucus might not accept?
Yeah, I'm worried about that because we won't get it passed if our caucus, we're the real linchpin. The House is the linchpin here, not the Senate. They have a little bit more wiggle room than we do. I think some of the debate is this baseline? Is it not baseline? What's it going to cost? Is it pro-growth? As far as I'm concerned, I want everything to be pro-growth. And the number one thing we have to look at is what is it effect on our debt? That's why we're doing all of this. Well, I think in part why we're looking at all of these things is to not grow our debt and actually pull back so the world actually thinks we're going to pay back and we're good for our debt or good for what the money that we owe. Whether the Senate does it first or not, I think a little bit is mute. We really have to look at what the folks in the House are able to tolerate as we move forward, regardless of what the Senate says.
Well, I wonder what the tolerance will be around the level the SALT cap is taxed at. Congressman Bloomberg is reporting today that the package Republicans are in the process of drafting would include lifting the SALT deduction to $25,000 from the current $10,000. Does that jive with what you're hearing? Do you think that's an appropriate number?
Well, I don't know where they get that because we've been discussing it in closed-door meeting on Ways and Means. I think that's some up to conjecture. You can pick any number that you've heard. But I think really that when push comes to shove, we want to try to help those members in the SALT states. The Senate doesn't have to worry about that at all because they just don't have that. They don't have SALT states per se as Republican states. Where we get to in a sweet spot really is going to be the dials that we've been turning back and forth. But, we'll see what happens. We'll see what surprises we can deliver for the American people when we get through our deliberation.
Just to follow up quickly, Congressman, does that number sound difficult to swallow? It sounds like we might have captured you in the throes of negotiation here. Kevin Brady was on with us a bit earlier, former chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, Republican from Texas. He thought something closer to 20 might be the final version of that. How about you?
I tell you, Joe, if I said Chairman Smith, who probably has all the rooms bugged and everything, would be after me in a heartbeat because we're really not supposed to talk about it. So I best say nothing at this point, right?
All right, pleading the fifth. Congressman, we appreciate you answering the questions that you can. Republican Congressman Greg Murphy of North Carolina joining us on Balance of Power this evening. Thank you so much. And still ahead on the program, how institutional investors should be repositioning their portfolios in light of the tariffs looming. We'll have analysis from Cindy Beaulieu, CIO of North America at Conning, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Obviously, some amount of that will pass through into prices, and so that will be inflationary, and maybe it'll be short-term, maybe long-term, we'll see. But I'm just as interested in what's going to happen on the employment side, because if you're a company that raises prices, the demand curve would suggest your volume's going to go down. And if you're a company that can't raise prices, then your margin goes down. In either case, you're going to start working on operational efficiencies, and that means headcount.
Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin earlier today on the potential economic impact of the tariffs President Trump is expected to announce tomorrow. And joining us now to discuss how the changing economic landscape is affecting the investment landscape is Cindy Beaulieu, CIO of North America at Conning, joining us here on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Cindy, thank you so much for your time as we are all awaiting clarity as to what exactly these tariffs will look like. Even though if we know the level and the country, we don't necessarily know for how long they will be in place. How do you make long-term investment decisions with no real clarity on the longer-term outlook?
That is a great question, Kaylee, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. It's very difficult right now for sure. And we came into this year looking at where spreads were across the fixed income markets, looking where valuations were across the equity markets, and saying there was so much euphoria built into those valuations, and that generally markets were getting ahead of where we thought the broader economy was going to go over the course of this year. Before we even get into this period of extreme uncertainty and unpredictability with Trump's plans and policies as he lays them out, But it was just that we had such a huge run up post the election, and we knew there was going to be some disappointment given the razor thin margins that the Republicans had in both the House and the Senate. And so we did expect there would be some turbulence. What really has been a bit disappointing to this point in the year from a fixed income perspective is we've had tremendous amount of volatility in Treasury yields, but yet spreads really have not budged, consistent with the type of volatility that we have seen in interest rates. And so that is an environment where it's appropriate to stay more risk neutral, stay closer to your benchmark. Don't really stretch for duration. Don't stretch down in credit quality because you're simply not being paid for the risks. And that's the way we've positioned portfolios from the start of this year. We're waiting for the opportunity. And it's quite possible, depending on what announcement we get tomorrow, that there could be a broader market sell-off than we've already seen already. Or it could be back to status quo and we start focusing on the rest of Trump's agenda. We're about 22 hours away from knowing what that's all going to look like. And hopefully we'll have some better idea when it all shakes out. But really for right now, even for longer term investors, it's stay close to your strategic plans and goals and look for the opportunities when they present themselves.
Well, so much for a clarifying moment tomorrow, Cindy. I'm curious about that worst case scenario. What would prompt another leg lower?
We think that that would look something like the 20% broad-based tariffs that have been suggested could be the plan that gets announced tomorrow. You know, reciprocal tariffs are interesting, and then you get to start negotiating with each country, and you start to work on each of the different products and the tariffs that, and even the non-tariffs, the VAT taxes, the other things that Trump is very concerned about. You get to start working on those and negotiating those lower. When you do a broad swath of 20% on everything, that does start to question how much of a negotiating tool is this, and how much is this more just about really trying to get something out of those tariffs. That's the concerning part that we're hearing more in some of the talk over the weekend and even days prior to that about this idea that we could see $600 billion of revenue per year from tariffs. You can't have it both ways. If they are a negotiating tool, they will bring prices down over time as they will bring tariffs down over time. But if they're not a negotiating tool and it's a plain 20% everywhere, that's how you get to $600 billion in revenue. It's really not the way we'd like to see revenue brought into this country. And we even have some questions as to whether or not it would hold up anyway, given all of the variabilities that exist as it relates to trade.
Well, so when we consider revenues brought into the country, there's also revenues that can be brought in by corporate America. Much will depend, Cindy, on their ability to pass on higher input costs and exercise that pricing power. If they can't do so, what happens in not just consumption behavior, because that would indicate consumers aren't tolerating those higher prices and purchasing less, but also corporate behavior in terms of the kind of hiring they're going to do, what kind of profit margins we realistically can expect, what kind of cost cutting they're going to be forced to undertake?
So when we came into this year, we had the expectation that the U.S. economy could still experience a recession, a mild one, a modest one, and it would be consumer-led. But the way we were approaching that was that we would hit a patch of economic weakness that would cause labor markets to finally crack. And if layoffs started to happen in a much broader form, then you would see the consumer forced to pull back. And that's how we get that cycle towards a recession. We're approaching it from a little bit different perspective now because the consumer confidence has cratered so quickly here. And we know that that can be a volatile data set. So we're watching it closely and not trying to draw too much from it at the moment. However, if the downturn in consumer confidence does ultimately lead to a real pullback in consumption, that gets back to what you were saying, Kayleigh. You can't pass the pricing through, and companies aren't going to eat that for very long. And what they're going to do is look to cut costs. And so we will see labor markets experience a pretty significant downturn. That's kind of the worst case scenario for the Fed, because we have an inflation problem today before we even introduce tariffs that we don't think are necessarily a one-for-one inflation problem anyway. We have inflation challenges for the Fed. So if you lose the labor markets when they can't really be in a position to lower rates because of inflation challenges, that's that stagflation word that's starting to bubble up a lot, and the Fed is really stuck.
We're talking a lot about tomorrow. Cindy, how about Friday and the monthly jobs report? The idea that the DOGE cuts will start to emerge adds potentially another layer to your argument.
So the DOGE cuts are interesting because we have seen some government jobs eliminated. That came through in the February report. We expect to see similar numbers for the March report. But the real big impact from those DOGE cuts is likely later out this year because a lot of those employees were given a 6-month window. Interestingly, a 6-month window when they can double dip and potentially take another job at the same time. But where we may really see the employment data start to show the challenges of the sheer number of employees being laid off is out in September.
All right, Cindy, come back when we have more time. Cindy Beaulieu, I love the way you spell your name, CIO, North America at Conning. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg. Coming up, the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, will be with us right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
He has said that those tariffs will go into place immediately, no 24-hour, 48-hour, month-long lead time. And so even for, the folks who have to enforce these tariffs at our ports and borders, they have to have certainty to be able to levy those tariffs. So hopefully something will be written down, but I'm not confident given that the president has, moved from just reciprocal to 20% blanket to different policies for different countries. It's very difficult to do that in, 24-hour period.
Liz Pancotti, Managing Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Groundwork Collaborative, speaking with us on the early edition of Balance of Power here, talking about the timeline for implementation of additional tariff policy with less than 24 hours now until tomorrow's event in the Rose Garden. We take a look at how individual states are preparing for the economic impact, if they can. Joining us now, in fact, from Denver, Colorado Governor Jared Polis. Governor, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. A report just out from a group called Farmers for Free Trade and the World Trade Center Denver finds that the tariff policies we're expecting, and we're unclear on what exactly they will be from Donald Trump tomorrow, could quadruple what Colorado already pays for imports. How do you prepare for that?
Look, I mean, this is one of the biggest tax hikes in American history. It's not Liberation Day, it's Recession Day. Fundamentally, I'm saddened because, like so many others, I was hoping the president was using this as a negotiating tactic to have more free trade, which we would love and benefit from. Free trade is fair trade, bring down tariffs and barriers, both for imports as well as reciprocally for exports to other countries. But it looks like they're actually fixated on a tax increase here, increasing the size of government through charging consumers more, destructive to American manufacturing. Agriculture is Colorado's biggest sector. It would be devastating. Our biggest trade partners, Canada and Mexico. So I really go into this in a very realistic but sad state that, that this is what it's coming to.
Well, as you talk about U.S. manufacturing, Governor, the president argues that this is a way to bring more manufacturing to this country. Do you expect Colorado could reap any of that benefit of companies wanting to make more in the United States?
It'll destroy American manufacturing. I've talked to many manufacturers here who are going to close down and move overseas or considering doing that because guess what? Two things. One is the supply chain for parts and materials is international. And if those are tariffed upon entry to the United States, if you're exporting to international markets, you're going to set up production in another country like Canada or Mexico or Central America. It doesn't make sense to manufacture anything here if you're not able to export it to other countries. And now they're going to have high reciprocal tariffs, as well as many of the inputs for those products are sourced in other countries as well. So you get tax coming, you get tax going, and the power to tax is the power to destroy. And I think if this policy moves forward, it'll do an excellent job of really hurting the American economy, and that's what makes me so sad.
Have you had or are you having any dialogue with the White House about this, Governor?
Well, I've certainly expressed to officials, and, when I had the chance to visit with the president himself, my skepticism of tariffs. I told him what I tell you. I said, look, if you're using this as a negotiating tactic to achieve more free trade and reduce tariffs, I'm all for it. I'll be the first to praise your four-dimensional chess and wisdom. But the proof will be in the pudding. If the tariffs actually go in, and they weren't in negotiation, we're effectively stabbing ourselves in the heart and causing a major recession that affects us and, of course, has global ramifications as well.
So what does not just you and your position as governor, but your party as Democrats, what can you do realistically to counter these policies from the administration, if anything?
Well, I think what we've learned for the future is that as part of future trade agreements, and who's going to, of course, trust the United States as a trade partner for negotiated treaties after this, we need to make sure that future presidents are not able to amend those without going back to Congress. I know our future trading partners are going to want to see this. We'll emerge from these dark ages of isolationism once again and embrace the global marketplace for made in America and grown in America products. And when we do, we're going to have to build in assurances that our trading partners will demand that we won't have future presidents at their own whim destroy our economy.
Governor, what does this mean for Colorado as a major tourism state? Count the ways, right? Skiing, hiking, craft breweries, weed. Are they all impacted?
They really are. So we talked about how it damages American manufacturing. Of course, how it damages consumers, that's self-evident. But it goes beyond those sectors because, you know, we trade in goodwill. And we've already seen a reduction in flights from Canada and Mexico, two of our biggest tourism partners as well. If you go to our ski resorts, and we still have our world-class skiing open here into spring, come visit. We often have many Canadian and Mexican tourists in Vail and Aspen, et cetera. We're already seeing decreases in that because of the burning through the goodwill. We know we're going to see that even more. So it not only hurts manufacturing, it not only hurts consumers, it also hurts tourism and many other sectors. Plus, look, we know better. This is economics 101. David Ricardo, competitive advantage. We know what this does. Every country shouldn't and doesn't need to make everything. Make what you're good at and trade. Trade inherently makes both parties better off, and they both emerge from a trade wealthier and in a better place, whether they're buying or selling, whether it's cash or a product or service. And we need more of that to help increase global prosperity, not less.
Well, obviously, Governor, the president also argues that what is needed to increase U.S. prosperity is not just what he sees as better balanced trade around the world, but also the notion that he needs lower barriers on things like regulation, lower taxes. In addition, he argues that tariffs and tax policy really shouldn't be separated. This should all be viewed as one long-term game here, and that tax cuts ultimately could act as a reprieve for whatever economic pain results from tariffs. What's your response to that theory?
Look, if corporate tax cuts can absolutely help companies grow, but remember, they only pay those taxes on profits. If the tariffs plunge you into losses, or from a profit into a loss, or to break-even status, you don't benefit one iota from a corporate tax cut if you're not even making money on your bottom line because of the tariffs. So tariffs are a tax on your gross rather than your net. And that's one of the reasons they're so pernicious. They can drive companies out of business in a way that corporate taxes, no matter how high they are, never can, because ultimately those are a tax on profits, whereas this is a tax on gross sales.
After tomorrow's announcement, will Colorado face a recession?
We're part of the United States of America in good times and in bad. It's like a marriage for better or for worse. No state can buck a national economic trend if this is where it takes it. And I still hope, as an American, that the president has a master negotiation strategy here that somehow will wind up with free trade with every country. If that happens, I will be the first to congratulate his brilliance. But I am skeptical. I don't think that's where it's going. And I'm fearful because from what I see so far, this is leading to a recession for the whole nation.
And finally, Governor, do you believe that the president has other voices in his ear, whether it's the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who may encourage some of the arguments you were making about the potential detrimental effects, or is this Trump and Trump's decision alone?
Well, I'm sure that there are many varied voices around the president. Republicans have traditionally been a pro-trade party. There's many pro-trade voices around the president. Again, high-stakes game of chicken at best. Awful, ill-informed, counterproductive, economic devastation at the worst. So, again, let's go into it with the benefit of a doubt. Let's hope that every country agrees to take down their barriers. Our tariffs go down, theirs go down. Call me a skeptic, but again, have me back in a week or two. And if that's what happens, I'll be praising the brilliance of the strategy.
All right, well, we'll look forward to you coming back, sir. Thanks very much for your time this evening. That's the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, here with us on our extended edition of Balance of Power. And we'll continue to extend this conversation on tomorrow's tariff announcement when we reassemble our political panel. That's still ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Liberation Day. Liberation Day. This is the beginning of Liberation Day. April 2nd is a liberating day for our country. We're going to be getting back some of the wealth that very, very foolish presidents gave away. We're in the process of imposing reciprocal tariffs. The numbers will be lower than what they've been charging us, and in some cases maybe substantially lower, but we sort of have a world obligation, perhaps. Friend has been oftentimes much worse than foe. That money's going to be coming back to us in the form of tariffs. We're going to be very nice. Relatively speaking, we're going to be very kind.
President Trump teasing his own tariff announcement that's set for tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern from the Rose Garden. And we want to take a look at the political implications of that now and reassemble this evening's political panel. Jim Kessler, Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, host of the Friday Reporter podcast, are back with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Lisa, the president obviously has talked about this as being Liberation Day for America. And yet when you look at actual economic sentiment polling for Americans right now, it seems that people are not actually feeling that liberated or are confident that this will liberate them. Is he making a political miscalculation here?
Well, you know, I keep going back to the fact that we have seen a lot of discussion about tariffs in the early days of his administration, and he's used them as a negotiating tactic. The governor himself just said that, right? He talked about the fact that perhaps this is a negotiating tactic. While I don't necessarily think that will happen, it is something to watch. I mean, he's calling it Liberation Day. Perhaps liberation and freedom mean the same thing. So maybe this means that we'll have freer and fairer trade. It'll be interesting to see. That certainly is the talking point that we've always used as a Republican spokesperson, I'll say.
Certainly coming out of this White House. So you look a couple weeks, months down the road, if the president succeeds in zeroing out some of these trade relationships, does he look like a genius?
Well, let's not go that far right now, because I do believe the president has made a miscalculation on this, which is foreign leaders who have stood up to Donald Trump have watched their approval ratings jump 30 points, okay? And they've gone from being flat on their backs to popular and possibly winning re-elections. So I think in the negotiating play, and I do believe that Donald Trump is doing a lot of this as a negotiating tactic, our trading partners, our former allies who are now our foes in this, they have a stronger hand than they did before because they're a lot more popular in their home countries. And backing down right now could hurt them. So I'm not sure this is playing out the way he wants it to.
Well, I guess that kind of raises the question as to whether or not these are tariffs that are long-lasting or short-term. Could we still see a kind of reorienting of the global trading system anyway if people who previously relied on the U.S. as reliable trading partners decide we are no longer so?
Yeah, I think you're going to see that. And I just saw, just across my feed 15 minutes ago, you know, China making overtures to India, to South Korea and Japan. And they're certainly going to make overtures to Europe because Europe is afraid of Russia, okay? The U.S. is afraid of China. If China is giving some assurances about Russia to Europe, like, you could see an economic partnership there. So this could play out in very complicated ways that are not advantageous to the U.S.
I want to ask you about the optics of this event tomorrow. We're opening up the Rose Garden for the first time this season, certainly for this president back in the White House. He had Kid Rock next to him for the signing of an EO that didn't make major headlines yesterday. What could we be in for tomorrow?
Oh, Joe, I don't know. I mean, I wish I knew. The Kid Rock, I know it didn't make a lot of news, but it certainly took a lot of headlines. We certainly saw it on TikTok and all the other social spaces.
But is there a show business component to this, I guess?
Yes, I think there probably will be. I expect that there will be. I also am a little bit worried, too, that as much as we talk about the implications of the tariffs, if they are to go into effect, this is not going to be a short-term pain for the U.S. economy. This is going to have an impact on unemployment. It's going to have an impact on costs for people that counted on Donald Trump to do the right thing. And the midterm elections are only 18 or 19 months away, and people will be feeling it when they start to make decisions about who to put back in the House and the Senate when it comes time for midterms. And Donald Trump wants to be successful politically. So I think that could be a miscalculation if, in fact, they go back in place.
So advantage Democrats, Jim, question mark?
Well, I think that people put up with the antics of Donald Trump because they are expecting a very good economy and that they're going to lead to prosperity and wealth. Americans are very shaky on that right now. Fox News poll out last Sunday, 74% of Americans believe we are either in a recession or about to be in a recession. Now, they're still giving Trump the benefit of the doubt. They still think, but their patience is wearing thin. So, yes, some advantage for Democrats.
It's interesting because this is one of the few singular moves that a president can make, right? Donald Trump truly owns this. But because Republicans have backed him with such loyalty, this blows back on Congress as well, if it doesn't work, is your point.
Exactly. And, Trump, I alone can fix it. Well, he alone may just break it. And, that's going to be an advantage for Democrats.
Well, when we consider Congress's reaction to this, it was supposed to happen today, but because Cory Booker is still holding court on the Senate floor, there was not a vote on the resolution that was being put forward by Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia to essentially nullify the emergency powers President Trump used to impose tariffs on Canada. Specifically, there was a lot of reporting this morning, Lisa, about Republicans who could actually go along with him on that. Do you expect we could be surprised by the number of figures that actually stand up to some or resist some of these tariff objectives from the president?
I'm not sure about that. I think that what you're going to see in the Rose Garden tomorrow will not only be a panoply of cabinet secretaries that are standing behind the president. I think you will see Republican leadership also standing with the president when this decision is made. But Kayleigh, I think that the one thing that we're hearing about is, you talked about farmers earlier in the broadcast. You talked about that is exactly the kinds of voices that are speaking up and speaking into these Republican offices right now, and they are hearing about it, and they don't know what to say when they get those calls. So if it doesn't happen tomorrow or whenever Senator Booker decides he's done having something to say, it will happen soon, and it may happen not long after, because you have to expect that the phone calls that are going into these legislative offices will continue in a much more vigorous way.
Look at that chart we're showing right now on Bloomberg TV. If you're with us on the radio, NASDAQ 100 since the U.S. election. It's more than a round trip, Lisa. How much more of this can this Republican administration take when it comes to approval ratings?
Well, I mean, we have a long way to go into the midterms. I mean, I said 18 months, 19 months that it is. But sentiment alone takes a much longer time to turn around. And I think even a lot of the leaders of industry that are saying that they're with Donald Trump have to be questioning whether or not he's making the right moves, because the stock market has had such a dramatic and volatile movement over the course of the last couple of weeks.
Well, it was pretty clear in his first administration that he, in large part, was guided by financial markets. He used them as a barometer of his own performance. Do we have an understanding of what guiding force he is governing by now, Jim?
It's hard to say, and there are 109 million Americans between the ages of 25 and 64 who do not have a college degree. Their median income is $61,000. If you're raising prices through tariffs on everybody, probably somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 if these tariffs go through, I don't care what your guiding philosophy is, those people who were the bread and butter for Donald Trump getting elected, they're going to be hurt, they're going to be angry, and a lot of them are going to leave him and Republicans.
This has taken a lot of oxygen out of the room. If you're a Republican leader on Capitol Hill right now, how concerned are you about this slowing down or making much more difficult your effort when it comes to reconciliation and extending the Trump tax cuts?
I think that they are incredibly concerned. I think that there's a lot of agitation on the Hill. There's also a lot of fear. There's a lot of concern. I mean, you talked about Elise Stefanik now not being the head of the UN, that she's going back to the district. She's going to have a position, some sort of position in the leadership that's a little bit undefined at this point. But I think there is a lot of fear, and that, I think, is absolutely the case. I don't know if Stefanik was pulled for that very reason, but I do think that there's a general concern. And, I mean, I know that there's a lot of early voting that happens in Florida, but tonight, don't forget, there is a decision that's to be made in 2 key districts in Florida, and that's going to be interesting to watch as well.
Well, yeah, certainly, especially in the 6th district, the seat vacated by Mike Waltz, the Supreme Court as well, which we discussed earlier on the program. Is it going to take, possibly, Jim, tangible results like that if we were to see Republicans fall in races like that for the president to change his mind? Or because he's not up for re-election himself, unless he's actually serious about the 3rd term, which is a question mark, does it really matter?
Well, it might not matter that much to the president. And a lot of times the president has a bit of disdain for, every president has a bit of disdain for Congress. They call them bedwetters. But look, Florida 6, it would be an absolute shocker if the Democrat won. But if it is close, you're going to have 30, 40, 50 House Republicans come back to the caucus tomorrow in an absolute panic. And when you're trying to get every single vote, that's where you start running into trouble.
Cory Booker's still talking. I just want to lay down a marker on that. We're coming up on 24 hours here, right?
Yep.
That could eclipse Strom Thurmond if he goes for roughly 30 more minutes speaking from the Senate floor. Jim Kessler, Lisa Camusa Miller, thank you so much for a great conversation here on Balance of Power. Coming up, final look ahead to tomorrow's Rose Garden event. Liberation Day, as the president calls it. We'll find out together on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, our extended edition. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. All of this, of course, is just leading up to tomorrow. We've had our countdown clock up because we're Bloomberg. Announcement 4 p.m. Eastern Time in the Rose Garden. Tariffs. We're just not exactly sure, Kaylee, how he's going to roll them out, but maybe we'll get some clues tomorrow morning on surveillance.
Yeah, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, will be joining our colleagues John, Lisa, and Anne-Marie in the morning. And it's going to be a question as to whether or not we have clarity at that time, or we really have to wait until after the market close to consider what these levies actually are going to look like. Again, 4 p.m. Eastern Time is when that Rose Garden event is scheduled. And as we were questioning with our political panel, it's a question of what the optics around this are going to be, how detailed the president actually gets at this time, and how much will be left to the readouts and actual policy documents we get later.
That's right. We'll, of course, bring this to you live from the Rose Garden tomorrow. I understand Howard Lutnick is on Thursday, is what we're hearing from the control room. So we'll have, I guess, a little bit of a follow-on conversation there, 8:30 Eastern Time for Howard Lutnick. So the next 24 hours, Kaylee, are going to be interesting.
Yeah, they absolutely will be. And, of course, we're going to be on air with you for a big part of those 24 hours, including another edition, extended edition of Balance of Power tomorrow night. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, who, of course, has been engaged in a bit of a tit-for-tat battle with the Trump administration on tariffs on his province, will be with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. And, of course, back on air earlier in the day, too, 12 and 1 p.m.
You said it. Meet us back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.